Building a marriage takes the right material, but these are not materials that can be purchased in a store. These materials have to be matured and cultivated on the inside. The Marriage Material Podcast Show was created to help listeners grow and mature in areas that are important to building and maintaining a healthy marriage and relationships. You are listening to the Marriage Material Podcast Show, and here's your host, Pastor Darius Good.
Thank you for joining us on today. You are listening to episode 2 of Marriage Material Podcast Show. My name is Darius Good. I am the pastor of Bible Gospel Center located in Hamden, Connecticut. Visit my website today, dariusgood.com. I have several books there that I've written. Check my books out. I have a children's series that I put together. One of the series is based on my youngest daughter, Riley. It's a children's book called The Adventures of Rai. We also have information regarding this podcast show as well as my other podcast shows. So make sure you visit my website today. That's DariusGood.com. On today, we want to deal with the topic of what makes a person marriage material. So you're listening to episode 2, and we're going to just jump right on in. This idea of marriage material, we often hear a woman say, I met a man, and if you ask them, is he marriage material? They know exactly what we're referring to. If you ask a man, I met a woman, is she marriage material? They know exactly what we are referring to. In the dating sphere, as we go out on dates and meet individuals, whether this is somebody you already know, maybe a blind date situation, oftentimes there is a metric, internal metric that we're using to determine whether a person is marriage material or not. And of course, I'm talking about those that are dating and who have a desire to be married. And so we have this term, marriage material. And what are we saying when we use that particular term? Let's define it. And so for today's lesson, we're going to define marriage material. Really, in essence, what you're saying is we are compatible. So what does compatible mean? It means we have the ability to exist together in harmony. So this means we've identified areas of similarity, like interest, like thoughts in regards to many different areas, whether it's activities we enjoy, whether it's politics, whether it's religion. And now let's begin to fine tune this, because just because two people might have the same religion does not mean they believe the same or they believe on the same level. And so this is where things get very difficult, where I've seen as in my counseling sessions, as people thought they were compatible and saw all these like similarities when they initially met or initially began dating. And it was enough similarities there that they thought they had the ability to build something of substance. And then over time, you begin to realize that there are drastic differences in these like areas of similarity. I enjoy working out. It's something I do. I've been working out since I was about 15 years old. I got into it pretty heavy. And at that time, I kind of jumped into following bodybuilding, as most of the muscle magazines provided workouts. And so even though I had no desire to be on stage or part of that culture, I was very familiar with the culture. I have friends that have worked out with actual bodybuilders, some bodybuilders that's actually been on the Olympic stage. And I also have friends that they themselves ended up competing and not necessarily getting their pro card, but they got the experience of being on stage. And so being around that culture, their concept of working out is not the same concept as your average person. And so if you're doing a split routine, which would mean I would go to the gym in the morning and then again in the evening, as we're hitting different body parts and trying to get 7 to 10 workouts in 1 week, that's a complete different mindset of someone that says, you know, I enjoy going to the gym and I go 3 times a week. That's a whole different level of intensity. When now you are eating based on a physical goal in mind, which now might mean I'm depleting myself. I'm going through all these extremes to obtain a certain level, whereas someone else just wants to eat healthy. They're not counting macros and some of these other things that are necessary to obtain certain physical goals. Let's talk about religion. Let's use this example. Just because two people are Christians, this does not mean they have the same convictions. And yes, we all have the same Bible, but no, we all don't believe the same. Otherwise, we wouldn't have all these different denominations. And so we can point to quite a few different areas that are needed to put a strong relationship together. And all these differences of thoughts and opinions are important that they're explored before you say someone is marriage material. We really use that term in a very loose manner because we haven't really dated long enough and gone below the surface to understand what a person's true thoughts are, and also what are their convictions? What are their values? What things are they not willing to budge on that might be a major difference of opinion with yourself? And so as two people are coming together to build a home, and we're using this term loosely of compatibility, talking about harmony, that does not mean the marriage will work. Just because a friendship works, just because dating works, does not necessarily mean marriage itself will work. Marriage is a very complete different animal than simply dating. So compatibility is very, very important, but it does not define what marriage is, nor does it guarantee that the marriage will be successful. And so it's one of the structures. If you think of the Colosseums there in like Rome, they had these pillars that they built the Colosseum on. What's interesting is the buildings, the structures are completely destroyed, but the pillars remain. And this is what's important with a marriage. You can go through all kind of ups and downs and storms and hurricanes and, tsunamis, however way we want to, visually describe things that a marriage may end up going through. Are your pillars strong enough to support the marriage? Everything else might get swept away, but if the pillars remain, then we still have something. And that's the core of the relationship. As I mentioned on episode 1, we spend so much time and effort developing our plans, goals for the wedding, but we don't spend the same amount of energy, time, thought, resources on putting the actual marriage together. Putting the marriage together is really building the structure. That's these pillars that are important to sustain and support a marriage. So compatibility, though important, is one of the pillars, and it's not enough to keep a marriage together. One major thing when it comes to compatibility is people grow. And so, as intended, or should be the case, who you are at 20 should not be who you are at 30. And who you are at 30 should not be who you are at 40, and we can go on and on. And people's values change over time. And their convictions begin to change over time. So with that being said, there is a need for flexibility when it comes to compatibility. Over the course of years, things that I did value, I might have been heavy into working out, but I'm not at that stage of my life anymore. And also my reasons for working out might have changed. When I was younger, I worked out for aesthetics and for looks. As I got older, I began to work out for more for health reasons. Now I work out to maintain a certain strength level. And so these things began to shift as we get older. And so if you put the weight of the relationship on compatibility, that alone will not sustain a marriage. Also, hopefully, your compatibility changes. And so you become more weaved together. Things that you may not have necessarily enjoyed now becomes more enjoyable because your spouse introduced you to something that now you put value on. And so all this is a part of the contracting and growing of relationships. There has to be a level of flexibility that's important to a relationship. So the final argument I want to make in today's episode is when it comes to the concept of marriage material. When we think of compatibility and harmony, what we've done is oftentimes it's built on surface, something that is more or less fragile, more or less has the ability to change over time. And so oftentimes people look at attraction. So the woman finds the man physically attractive and vice versa, then that ranks very high on our list of compatibility. We look at career choices, whether they're currently working or striving towards a career. We look at religion, their belief system, whether it's politics or some of these different areas. This has nothing to do with marriage compatibility. And so marriage compatibility is really not about what you can identify on the outside with your eye or their systems of belief. Compatibility in a marriage is really about character. And that's very important. And this is an area that I don't hear talked about when I get together with couples. And now we say, let's describe your partner to me. Who is this person that you're falling in love with? And if we're listing all this surface, let's use the example of a house. I'm looking at the outward house, the outside of the home. I'm describing the exterior. Then that doesn't mean that's a house that you want to live in. I can't make that decision until I walk through that front door. And I need to see what the front room looks like. And I need to see what the kitchen looks like. And I need to see what the bathroom looks like. And I need to see what the bedroom looks like. And then I need to be able to open the drawers and see what those drawers look like. And what's inside the closets that you might have thrown in there just to make the house presentable. Things that you don't want to address and deal with yet. These are the areas that are very important when it comes to compatibility. I am talking to a man right now whose ex-wife, he's now coming into the understanding that she was a liar. Things that we didn't see initially while dating. And it took time. It took history. It took experience to see a person's true self. Because these are things people will not identify. When we sit down and we have our conversations, what do you like? What do you enjoy? They're not going to come out and just blatantly say, I am a liar. People don't admit these things about themselves. But if you want a characteristic that would tear your marriage apart, marry a liar. People always talk about adultery. We got adultery very high on the list. We want fidelity in a marriage. But guess what? Lying is just as bad as infidelity. And so these are part of those columns, those structures that need to be built first before you decide that you want to build a marriage with a person. These are things that have to be identified. There's one thing I believe with all my heart. I believe that we, especially with our American mindset, we have dated wrong. And for this reason, a lot of the pillars that we built in the marriage are really hollow. They're not solid. And so we looked at the surface, but we never went deep enough to build something that has the ability to last when the storm comes. How do we identify when something's hollow as opposed to solid? One thing is, do not ignore the red flags. And I won't go into much depth in today's episode about red flags. But those red flags are key to understanding what you're seeing. Every broken marriage, and I don't have any numbers on this, I would venture to say at least 90 to 95% of every broken marriage, you could see the red flags. And so we can't ignore the red flags, because those flags are waving and they're identifying problems or areas in a person's character that you now need to have a much better understanding of. Don't go into a relationship blind. And there's going to be flaws and areas of imperfection with everyone. So we're not looking for the perfect person, but you do not want to enter into a relationship, especially marriage, when you don't know the individual. There's areas about them that you don't know. And so you have a person that's dishonest, that's not trustworthy. They cut corners. And we can find a bunch of different areas that has the potential of making a marriage difficult. We're not looking for the perfect person, but we need to be aware of someone's flaws. Remember, naked and unashamed. That's our description for Adam and Eve. They knew each other's flaws. Now, they were perfect because God created them perfect. But when it comes to us, who live in a world that's affected by darkness, we have these flaws. And so we should be able to be in a relationship where I'm not ashamed of my flaws and I can be exposed to the other individual. But these are things that need to be exposed before marriage. It's very difficult learning these things about your spouse while married and trying to make sure that you keep this family unit together. That's very difficult. And so don't go into marriage with blind eyes. They say love is blind. That's very dangerous, and it's very true. Thank you for joining us on today. We're going to explore these structures that are needed to build healthy marriages. And we're going to explore the concept of marriage material much deeper. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to our podcast show. Thank you for joining us on today. And until next time, be blessed.
You have been listening to the Marriage Material Podcast Show with your host, Darius Good. This was a Good Treasure Ministries production. Darius is a senior pastor of Bible Gospel Center and the author of the book, Soul Ties. To learn more about this book and other books written by Darius, or to listen to other episodes, visit our website today at dariusgood.com. Please like, share, and subscribe to our podcast show. And until the next time, be blessed.